After 200 days, the Nigerian government lifts the ban on Twitter. And another INEC official resigns and embraces the All Progressive Congress APC as he joins the governorship race. This is Plus Politics. I am Mary Anna Cole. The Nigerian government has lifted the suspension of Twitter's operation suspension in a statement. The federal government on June the 4th of 2021 announced the suspension of the... Had this conversation over and over, more curious as to why government is lifting the ban now. But what are your thoughts?
Well, eventually the so-called ban was going to be lifted because there was no reason for the suspension or the ban to have been imposed in the first place. As I have consistently maintained, it was a decision that was not warranted. It was a decision that was taken in bad faith. It was a decision that was taken on account of vengeance, in pursuance of vendetta, by a regime that felt slighted, by what was rightfully perceived by a large section of the population as a genocidal and irresponsible tweet by the president was deleted. That accounted for the so-called ban that the government imposed. So eventually, the government had to reverse the abnormality that they had forced on the country.
But the government...
Well, the evidence of that. Nothing was pointed out except a veiled reference to Nnamdi Kanu. And I'm in court, I'm still in court with them on this, so I don't want to go into the details of the matter in court, but I can also tell you for free that even in court, as I argued before Honorable Justice Faji, 2 days ago, no single tweet of Nnamdi Kanu was exhibited in court. Not even one as evidence of inciting the public. And in any event, you cannot apply collective punishment to say that because one person has wrongly used Twitter, just as Buhari himself did, because he abused Twitter, he used Twitter in the wrong manner by that particular tweet that he put out. You will now suspend the entire platform and deny millions of Nigerians access to it. The regulatory issues that they have raised, matters pertaining to registration with CAC, with having a representative in Nigeria, compliance with so-called Nigerian laws that they haven't really specifically cited, and other issues of taxation. These are matters that could have been resolved without the very responsible ban that was placed on that platform. In any event, these conditions, these requirements have not been imposed in like manner on other platforms. We still have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have Snapchat, and other social media apps that Nigerians are still using. Why is it that Twitter was isolated? Why is it that this ban was targeted specifically at Twitter? I have told you the reason, and I made that point clear to the court, that the court should go beyond the baseless statement that they have made about the corporate to allow for them to regulate social media. And they also tried to introduce the social media bill that was wrongly rejected at the public hearing. What that shows you is that the government started regulation through sanction, which, as I argued previously, cannot be done, should not be tolerated. You cannot start regulation through sanction. You must set the necessary legislative framework in place. That has not been done till then.
As to the case that they made or the reasons they gave Nigerians for putting Twitter on hold or suspending the services of Twitter in Nigeria. Now, they ignored the law. That's number one. Secondly, there was an ECOWAS court, judgment that said that, the government did not have a right to suspend Twitter and that Twitter should be brought back. Well, we've not really heard anything about that. Media houses had to comply. We were given an order. In fact, that order was much, much more like, if you were still on social media, you might get sanctioned by the NBC. And that's also for the telecommunications companies, across the country. So why exactly do you think that the government is this high-handed in terms of issues such as this?
Well, thank you. I think it's very evident that the ban or so-called suspension of Twitter in Nigeria is largely born out of, number one, the EndSARS protests, and number two, and I think that was the grain of rice that tilted the scale, the removal or taking down of President Buhari's tweet. Now, the initial reaction of the government was to just ban it, and the government needs to realize that this is not 1983. This is the democratic government, which means that freedom of speech and how you censure it needs to go through the appropriate channel. And like Ini said, all of these things about introducing a bill came after the occurrence of the event. In other words, there's nothing that has been done now that the government could not have done before it proceeded with the suspension. In other words, engaging Twitter. They could have been able to proceed with Twitter to engage them actively and effectively to ensure that all of these, their concerns are adequately met. And if you look at the statement that was issued by the DG of NITA, that's Mr. Abdullahi, the concerns that the government raised were that Twitter was being used to propagate fake news and polarizing Nigeria, and also amounted to a threat to our national security. Now, there's nothing in the statement issued detailing the conditions that Twitter needs to meet that identifies to us or to any reasonable Nigerian that all of these concerns that led to the banning in the first place have been met. So what you have are, number one, we can agree that the ban was very high-handed, was ill-advised, was hasty. Now, this lifting of the ban also, we all know that the lifting of the ban is in good time for the political season. So a lot of the political activists and...
I'm sorry, let me comment there. Why do you think that this is... because I've heard people, we've seen comments on social media, and people are saying, well, this is just because they need to use the social media for political reasons. But why? Just like Ini said, there are other social platforms that they can use. Why Twitter? If Twitter was that important to Mr. President and his cohorts, why did they have to ban it for so long and now want to use it when it's convenient? I'm just, pushing the argument.
Exactly. So just buttressing my point. Now, you would realize that a lot of Nigerian youths use Twitter more than they use Instagram and Facebook and the rest. So Twitter is actually the most used social media platform in Nigeria. Yes, Facebook comes a close second, but Twitter is largely used by, the enlightened populace. And if you notice yesterday when the ban was lifted, a lot of these politicians and their cohorts were tweeting messages announcing their resumption of activities on Twitter. You have the presidential aides also did the same as well, announcing that they're back on Twitter. And now it all ties in to the fact that we are now here in a season where they need to get their message across. They need to find a way of pushing their candidates and ensuring that the enlightened people who use Twitter have an idea of who and who is running for office or who desires to take control of our destiny as the people. So, because if you look at the statement that was issued by Mr. Abdullahi, ask yourself the question, has Twitter registered in Nigeria? Of course not. Has Twitter paid taxes to Nigeria? Of course not. Has Twitter appointed a country representative for Nigeria? Of course not. So why exactly is the government in a hurry to lift the ban on Twitter when Twitter has not even made the conditions that they themselves...
But I'm also curious as to why Twitter is quiet about it, because if you're saying that Twitter has not met these conditions, they seem very tight-lipped about it, meaning that they're just going with it because they just want to continue to have Nigerians on Twitter. I'm saying if the record needs to be set straight, if the government is saying Twitter has done this and Twitter hasn't really complied, why are they tight-lipped about it?
Well, I think that having regard to the engagement that they had with Twitter, don't forget that there was the presidential committee that was set up, and then there was the technical committee that was set up. So they've had 7 months to deal and engage with Twitter and its employees and its people. So there would be some sort of understanding. I mean, I don't have it, but I would believe that there's some sort of understanding between the government and Twitter. And I do not think that Twitter would want to rock the boat now. I haven't gotten this far, because don't forget that a lot of Nigerians who actually use Twitter every day use the VPNs. They use the virtual private networks to continue the activities. And I mean, it went on as smoothly as
Oh, I think that we lost audio with... Okay, Ayodeji, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
Yes, we lost your audio for a second.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. So I said the reason why the government has decided to issue the statement and to lift the ban is very obvious to the naked eye. And that is because they want to use this season. I mean, they have barely a few months to elections, and they need Twitter to push the agenda. Because if you look at the statement that was issued by them, there is nothing on paper that suggests that the reasons for the ban have actually been complied with or addressed by Twitter. I mean, how do you tell? Has Twitter been able to stop the spread of fake news by Nigerians? Has it been able to solve our tribal issues or differences? Has Twitter been able to improve our national security? Those are questions that need to be answered, and I do not see any answer from the government for now.
Back to you, Ini. Still talking about the issue of high-handedness. I mean, they talked about propagating fake news and propaganda and all of that as some of the reasons why Twitter was brought down. What has changed? What will change now that they brought Twitter back? Is the government going to assure us that they will not also participate in these propaganda, in this new fake news, or will they not?
They claim Twitter existed in Nigeria illegally, having not been incorporated by the Corporate Affairs Commission. And that is the fulcrum, the substance of their case, their defense in court. As I speak to you today, has Twitter been registered by CSC? The answer is no. Has Twitter paid a single tax to the Nigerian government as that today? The answer is no. So what has happened differently? Absolutely nothing. All that they claimed they got was can I even call that a promissory note? I can't call that a promissory note. They just got certain undertakings. They claimed they got certain undertakings that Twitter said, oh, by the first half of 2022, blah, 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 we are going.
I think we lost connection there with Ini. Pastor Niba, can you hear me? I think that connection is lost. I'm going to come back to you, Ayodeji. Let's look at the international community that mostly frowned at, the federal government's action at the time, who kept calling on the government to do right. They also frowned at the issues of NSAS and but that's not our base, that's not what we're talking about today. I've seen a couple of, international community Twitter handles excited about the fact that Nigeria has restored Twitter. So I'm going to toss the same question I asked Ini back to you. How are we certain that the federal government will do as it says we should do, and everybody else, including the media houses, the newspapers, the average Nigerian who's tweeting? How are we certain that they will not fall victim of the same crimes that they're alleging that Nigerians were committing using social media, especially Twitter?
A very straight answer. There is no certainty that we can hold on to from the government. What this government has shown in the past 6+ years is that they do things out of impulse, because this Twitter ban itself was not well thought out. It was ill-advised. Now, if you recall, this same government rose to power on the basis of Twitter. At a point during 2014, 2013, you could see a lot of criticisms leveled against the former president, Jonathan, at the time. Were those criticisms deserved at the time? Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. The government at the time was not performing, and the APC government, the APC as the party, rightly criticized the government. Now, so what has changed with this government? Why are they so not ready to receive criticism? Why are they so not receptive to criticism? And that's a question they should answer. Because now that if you're in government, you're there to serve the people. And if the people have questions to ask, then they should genuinely ask you. Now, if you look at the statement issued by Mr. Abdullahi again, he did say in the statement that the priority of the government is to adapt and not to ban Twitter. Now, if that was the government's priority in the very first place, then there was basically no reason to have suspended or to have banned Twitter in the very first place. You could have engaged Twitter the way that the Presidential Committee did and the Executive Committee did without banning Twitter. Now, and that's why we, as lawyers, will ask the questions. Because if the reason for the action, that's for the ban in the very first place, has not been resolved, the issues that you raised in the beginning have not been resolved, what is the guarantee? Or what necessitated the lifting of the ban? We have not seen any evidence of any statement by Twitter. There's no statement by Twitter clearly agreeing to all of these conditions. We don't know what their office address is, even though the announcement says that Twitter should be registered in Nigeria in the first quarter. I would have thought that the first condition would be that Twitter would register with the CAC. It doesn't take long. I mean, you have the ease of doing business. I mean, that would have been a good example, a prime time to use that ease of doing business platform to have Twitter registered swiftly. Then you would have an office address, and then we can say that Twitter is taking Nigeria seriously. But as it appears to us, it seems that it's all a political game that is well orchestrated. And of course, at the right time, because the ordinary Nigerians have found a way around Twitter, around the Twitter ban. They use the VPNs, and they use it effectively. And if I may say, some Nigerians on Twitter are already complaining about the resumption of political activities on Twitter, because what that did was effectively government and political party agents could not tweet. So there was little or no friction as it relates to engaging government. They couldn't tweet for about several months, and there was a lot of peace on the timeline. But now that they are back, between yesterday and today, I mean, you've had a lot of issues going back and forth. So the government is the one that is coming back to Twitter, not the people. The people have always been on Twitter, and they found a way around.